How to make icicles in Blender using geometry nodes. I'm Jordan Needham, this is Jham 3D, and let's go ahead and get into this. So, this is kind of the result that we're gonna be looking at. Yeah, it's nothing super crazy, but surprisingly, there's actually a decent amount of steps to this. So, I wanna make sure that I explain everything thoroughly so that you guys can adjust things the way that you want to, and also go ahead and make some cool geometry node setups on your own. So with a new Blender file open, let's go ahead and go into the geometry nodes tab, and let's delete this cube, Shift A, add in a plane, and then tab into edit mode, and let's delete one of these vertices. So now we'll just have two of these edges here. I'll explain why in a second. Actually, it's gonna be towards the end of the video, so not a second. But now let's go ahead and go to our geometry nodes modifier tab, click new, and call this Icicle. Let's disconnect these two nodes, the input from the output, because we want to start off by actually creating the Icicle. Shift A, add in a curved line. Plug that into here. You're gonna get kind of this straight edge, this straight line. Now we need to give it some volume, some geometry, and to do that, Shift A, let's do a curve to mesh node. And Shift A, add in a curve circle, and plug this into the profile curve, and now we get this cylinder. We're gonna want to fill those two caps. We have a cylinder now. Now the reason that I used a curved line instead of a cylinder is because the actual control points of the curve give us extra options which we wouldn't have if we were just using a cylinder. My God, this plane is loud. And you'll see that in a minute. So let's control the radius of this. Let's kind of decrease the radius on this curved circle. That looks a bit close. That's 0.003 meters. If we take a look at a icicle, they start thick and the girth or the radius kind of decreases as it melts, as it drips, as it goes down, what have you. It kind of merges to a single point is what I'm getting at. And so the way that we want to do this, Shift A, add in a set curve radius. Now we want to Shift A, add in a spline parameter node, and plug the factor into the radius. And just like that, it's kind of already started that. Thick at the top, thin at the bottom. Nice.
Nice.
So now we have a really boring sort of thorn or spike, but we want to change this to actually look like it's full of water, like it's made out of water. Because if you take a look at these icicles, they're definitely displaced in some sort of way. So they're not just like perfectly linear or constant or whatever you want to say. So let's change this by using a set position node. And effectively we can get the set position node to work as sort of a displacement modifier. And to do that, let's Shift A, add in a noise texture, plug the factor into the offset, and now it's gonna put us all up over to land, which is not what we want to do. We want to be kind of back towards the center here. What it's doing is it's moving every single piece of this geometry away from the origin point. But we want to kind of clamp that, control it down a little bit more, because this is, you know, we don't want to be in land. So Shift A, add in a map range node. And now I'm just going to go ahead and go off a little bit here, and then I'm going to explain the setup. Shift A, add in a math node. Change this from add to multiply, and then let's duplicate this map range node, plug the result into the top value of our multiply, and then the multiply into the minimum. I know it's a lot of steps right here, so Shift D, duplicate this parameter node, the spline parameter, plug the factor into the value. If we change our multiply value to -1 and we plug the map range into the 2 max over here, we have successfully clamped it back down. But now if we mess with our noise, it's it looks like it's kind of rotating from that bottom point. But really what's happening is there's not enough geometry for this noise texture to displace anything. And so we've got it kind of clamped at the top and bottom, but it's not able to distort or displace anything in between. And the way to fix that is we go Shift A and add in a resample curve node right here. And if we take the count up to like 30, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a ridiculous lightning bolt, which you could see when our count was a little lower. But yeah, get it at something like 30. That's going to give us plenty of geometry, I think, to displace. If we turn up the noise value, if we turn up the noise texture scale, you can see it working. So now we have another problem, which is that the strength of this displacement is just too ridiculous. And a way to control that is actually on this first map range node. We want to change the 2 max value and really just decrease that a load. Okay, something like 0.02. Yeah, that's looking about right. Maybe 0.04 is good. Yeah, so we don't want to get too crazy here. So I'm actually going to go back to 0.03. And yeah, why not? We'll save this file as well. Now we have our icicle. Aside from a couple of things. One, it doesn't look smooth or like bulbous, which might not be a problem to you. What I mean by like bulbous is like you can see maybe this image isn't the best. If we look at this, we can see that these are kind of, there's kind of like bubbles, and they do create this sort of round bulbous displacement on the outside. And so I don't really want to make it look super rounded like this. That's typically not the sort of icicle people are going for. It's more of like this, but I think a blend of the kind of two is also cool. To add sort of that smooth, rounded take to this, what we want to do is Shift A, add in a subdivision surface modifier. Node, I'm sorry, I said modifier. And that'll just kind of smooth it out a little bit. Now, you might not need this, and if you don't need it, then don't use it. But at the top, it will make it look gross. I'm kind of assuming that you're not going to be looking at the top, because after all, it is an icicle. Who the hell is looking at the top of it? Okay, cool. So now we have our icicle completely modeled. Maybe it's a little too long. I'm going to decrease this a little bit. Really cool, actually. If you wanted to make a sort of growing or melting animation, you could use or animate these values right here. Okay. Yeah, let's half this to 0.5. So now it's more like an icicle, I would say. Not a super long one, but maybe an average one. One that you definitely don't want stabbing into your cornea, I suppose. Now on to the second portion of this tutorial, which is to distribute the icicle onto a surface, or really to hang it off the edge of something. That's what you're going to want to be doing, I'm assuming. So I'm going to mimic that we're doing it off the side of a roof. Now, if you guys remember, at the very start, we had a face, which we turned, or a plane, which we turned into 2 edges. And so now we have 3 vertices, 2 edges, you know, a portion of a square. And so I'm going to go ahead and scale this just to make it look a little bit more interesting. We're going to scale on the X value. And then, yeah, so that's maybe like the front of a house, like a standard house.
Professionals have standards.
And now, let's add in a Shift A join geometry node. And let's plug the input into that. And we're going to need this later, just for visualization reasons. Now we want to start distributing these icicles, or this icicle. The way that we're going to do that is, first of all, we want to block off these nodes or this icicle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of those nodes and then press Ctrl J, which will make this sort of group here, and or a frame, I'm sorry. And we're going to just call this icicle. You press N to bring up this panel if you don't see it. Then you can change the label down there. And so now we have our icicle down here, and this is just for simplicity's sake, just kind of keep everything separated and blocked out and organized. Let's add an instance on points node. And it's going to hide your geometry. If you want to still see it, take the input, plug it into that join geometry node. Okay, plug in our icicle into our instance right here. Now the reason I scaled up this mesh was to show you that just in case you start having this problem where your icicles are like skewed in a way or scaled in a way that doesn't look right, the way to fix that is you would click on that mesh that you're distributed on and then Control A, apply scale, and then there we go. It fixed that issue. You can see before and then after. So now we have a few distributed, but it's not enough because there's only 3 points on this mesh. To add more points, what we could do is in edit mode, we could just start subdividing this, or we could do that in geometry nodes with a subdivide mesh node. And we can tack this up to something like, I don't know, 4 might be good. 4. 5 is pretty dense, but let's go ahead and do that. And then I want to see, just for simplicity's sake, we're going to plug the subdivision mesh into this join geometry node, and then Control, right mouse click, cut that. Okay, now one sort of flaw of this current build that we're working on is that you can see on the side here, because the edge is actually shorter than it is on the front, that there are more points and therefore more icicles there than there are in the front, because the distance is longer on the front and there's less points relative to the distance or the length of that. And so that's why it's so dense on the side and not in the front. If you wanted to change that, you could manually go into here and add your points in edit mode, which would control exactly where those go. Okay, now we have a continuity problem where actually everything looks exactly the same. All of our icicles have the same noise applied to them, and they are the same scale. To deal with that, we can quickly add a random value node, plug that into the scale, and if we change this max to something like 0.3, I think that's more realistic. And the minimum, we don't really ever want to be at 0, because 0 scale means there is nothing there. Okay, so we fixed the scale issue, and now these are all kind of randomized. If we play with the seed, we can change that as well. So we have two other problems to solve right now. We got the icicles looking exactly the same, so we want to further displace them in a unique way for each individual instance. Also, what we want to do is notice that the geometry nodes here, or the icicles, are sort of growing up instead of hanging off the edge of our building. Say that supposed to be facing this way, like that's towards the ground, but we are instead growing that way. So that's not what we want to do. And to fix that, just a couple of steps. Come over to your icicle setup right here. And if we change the Z value on our curve line to a negative value, that'll make sure that it hangs off. But now you see that the radius is going in the opposite direction. It's working in the opposite way that we want it to. To flip that around, go to your set curve radius, add in a color ramp, plug that in between the spline parameter and the set curve radius, and then we can flip this color ramp. And there we go, we fixed that issue. Very nice.
Nice.
Okay, now the last step, it's the last big step, is to displace individually each and every one of these icicles so that they look different and so that they're not all the same. And the way that we're going to do that is kind of with the same method with an extra step of how we displace the original icicle. So let's just duplicate all of these nodes over here. Bring it over here. Now with all these selected, if we press Control J, it'll separate that into its own frame, which you can keep if you want. I don't know. Instance because this is instance displacement. We're going to plug our instance on points to our set position, and then our set position into our join geometry node right here. You know what? I don't want this frame. I'm just gonna delete it. We could group everything, but I don't think it's necessary. Okay, you don't really see a lot happening, right? You don't see anything happening. That is really because of this spline parameter node. Make sure that everything is correct there. Okay. And now if we mute this, so there's really not much happening here, and that's because we're missing something. Basically, somewhere along the way, it lost the spline parameter value here. So to fix that, what we're going to do is actually delete this spline parameter node. And let's come over here to actually right here, right after our resample curve node, let's add in a capture attribute node and plug that in right here. And then let's plug the factor of this spline parameter right here into the value. And then if we take this attribute value and bring it all the way over here to our value, we should start to see the result here. It's not working. And I forgot one really important thing. Nothing is happening, and I'm sorry for doing this out of order, but basically we need to Shift A realize these instances first, and now this whole setup will start working. Now without that spline parameter, if we start adjusting these values, you can see it starts deviating from our rooftop or our distribution mesh, whatever, and to control that, that's where the capture attribute, spline parameter, value, or attribute comes in handy, because it snaps it to those points, which is very nice. And so now we can control those without it going way off into land like we were having a problem with earlier. Now you have unique icicles on every point, and you might want to keep adjusting these values. So maybe our 2 max is too much over here. You know what? I think this is pretty good. I mean, you guys can control these a little bit more if you want to. You can dial in what you want, but I think this is pretty good. Other things that you would want to do, if you made a certain ice material at the end here, you would want to, right here actually, before that roof, you want to add in a set material node, and then you would place your material on right here, and that, I don't know, we'd call it ice or something. So if we go over to materials and call this ice, that is how you would apply the material to just those instances and not the roof. One other thing, if you want to control the most important parts of this geometry node, what you can do is take this group input and start plugging in the most important values that you want to control. So that would be probably this first 2 max right here, because that's our like initial displacement. And then maybe we want to control the seed of our noise texture as well right here. By changing this from 3D to 4D, we can use this W value, which will control that seed. And then what else do we need? Maybe we want the length as well. So can we do that? If we take the end of this, plug it in right there, we can control the length of our curve, of our icicles. You know, the subdivide mesh value might be really nice too, because this kind of controls how many instances or how many icicles there are. Now on our modifier panel over here, we can control all these values. Now, it might get confusing, so you should probably name these. And the way to do that, click on our group input, make sure our panel over here is open. N is the shortcut to toggle that. And if we go to our inputs, we can rename these. So this is our first displacement, so we'll say, I don't know, displace. And then this is our first seed value, our noise, seed 1. And this is the length. Now we can control all of this right over here. Super nice.
Nice.
That's how to make icicles in Blender using geometry nodes. If you guys wanted a ice texture, I mean, really there's 1.5 million different ways to do that. So I kind of held off on that for now. If you guys make anything cool with this, please let me know. You can share your work with me, jham.3d on Instagram. That's jham.3d. If you guys have any questions or comments, or maybe, you know, I didn't cover something good enough, just let me know in the comments below. I'll be glad to answer your questions. And if you want to join a community built to support human artists of the future amidst this AI art revolution, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button so you don't miss the announcement to that community. We're taking early members right now, so if you ask for an invite link, I may give it to you. But again, it's very restricted for now. I'm Jordan Needham, this is Jham3D, and I will catch you next time.